Good day, Miss. I am Jane Kennedy Igot, and together with my pair Joanna Marito Gade, we will be reporting Chapter 15 Financial Assets at Fair Value. To start with, let us define what is investments. According to International Accounting Standards Board, investments are assets held by an entity for the accretion of wealth through distributions such as interest, royalties, dividends, and rentals, for capital appreciation, and for other benefits to the trading relationships. So here are some purposes of investments. First is for accretion of wealth or regular income through interest, dividends, royalties, and rentals. What do you mean by accretion of wealth? So increase the value of wealth through interest. For example, ang entity kay nagpautang, so na ay creditor and borrower relationship. Therefore, ang entity kay maka-receive siya interest sa iyahang borrower. Next, dividends. If ang entity kay ni palit og shares sa another entity, therefore ang entity kay mahimong shareholder, so na siya ma-receive nga dividends. For royalties, for example, ang author sa book, so na certain amount nga ma-receive siya for royalties. And rentals, for example, ang entity kay nagpatukod og building and the purpose of the building kay for rental, so na siya ma-receive nga rental income which increases the value of wealth. Second, for capital appreciation, as in the case of investments in land and real estate held for appreciation and direct investments in gold, diamonds, and other precious commodities. So this is basically the entity will invest sa mga items nga nag-appreciate ang value or nag-increase ang value in the future, such as land. As we all know, ang value sa land in the near future, magkataas yun na ang amount, diba? So as well as the golds, diamonds, and other precious commodities. Third, for ownership control as in the case of investments in the subsidiaries and associates. So na instances na ang entity will buy from another entity, so na siya ownership, na siya, oh my god, wait, na siya ownership control. Either the entity has a significant influence sa entity nga iyang gipalitan or naa siya control sa entity. Fourth, for meeting business requirements, as in the case of sinking fund, preferential redemption fund, plant expansion fund, and other non-current fund. So basically, ang entity kay nagseta siya mga funds for future years. For example, sinking fund. What if na yung mga bayranan ng entity nga dako kayo, so pwede rin niya use iyang sinking fund. Also, if ang entity kay nagplan siya mag-expand siyang business, so pwede niya use ang plant expansion fund. Lastly, for protection as in the case of interest and life insurance contract in the form of cash surrender value. So meaning, ang entity kay mo-pay og premium sa insurance provider. So unsa din ang cash surrender value? Ang cash surrender value, mo siya ang amount of cash nga i-return sa insurance provider sa entity upon voluntary termination sa life insurance contract. So here are the definitions of financial assets. So financial assets is an assets that is first cash because it is a medium of exchange and is therefore the basis on which all transactions are measured and recognized in financial statements. Next, it is a contractual right to receive cash or another financial assets from another entity, which includes trade accounts receivable, notes receivable, and loans receivable. Next is, it is a contractual right to exchange financial instrument with another entity under conditions that are potentially favorable. What do you mean by favorable nga condition? So it is an option held by the holder to purchase shares of another entity at less than market price. And lastly, it is an entity instrument of another entity, such as trading securities. So here are the classification of financial assets. There are three. First is financial assets at fair value through profit or loss, or FVPL, which include both equity and debt securities. Later on, nato define sa din ng equity and debt securities. So next is financial assets at fair value through other comprehensive income, or FVOCI, which includes as well both equity and debt securities. And lastly, financial assets, it is measured at amortized cost, which includes only the debt securities. So as I said, unsa na equity and debt securities. So equity securities represents an ownership interest in an entity. Ownership shares included ordinary shares, preference shares, and rights and options to acquire ownership shares. So kanang ordinary shares, the preference shares, equity securities na sila. And equity securities do not include redeemable preference shares, treasury shares, and convertible shares. So what is debt security? A debt security is any security that represents a creditor relationship with an entity, and the debt security has a maturity date and a maturity value. So basically, ang equity kay na ownership, ang debt security kay creditor relationship. Next. So initial measurements of financial assets. A financial asset is recognized initially at fair value plus transactions cost. So if a financial asset is measured through a VOCI o amortized cost, so ang transaction cost niya kay imo ra plus. So if financial asset is measured at FVPL or financial value through profit or loss, ang transaction cost niya are expense outright. So, i-expense nimo. Next. Financial assets at fair value through profit or loss. So, the following financial assets shall be measured at FVPL. So, first is financial assets held for trading or trading securities. Unsa na trading securities? So these are debt and equity securities that are purchased with the intent of selling them in the near term or very soon. Next, all other investments in quoted equity instruments. Third, financial assets that are irrevocably designated on initial recognition as at fair value through profit or loss. What do you mean by irrevocably? Meaning, dili na ma-change. This fair value option is applicable to investments in bonds and other debt instruments which can be irrevocably designated as at fair value through profit or loss even if the financial assets satisfy the amortized cost or financial value through other comprehensive income measurement. Lastly, all debt instruments that do not satisfy requirements for measurements at amortized cost and a VOCI. So, yeah. Yes. Next, equity instruments at fair value through OCI. At initial recognition, the PFRS 9 provides that an entity make an irrevocable election to present in other comprehensive income or OCI subsequent changes in fair value of an investment in equity instrument that is not held for trading. So, ang equity investment at fair value through OCI kay para rin siya sa not held for trading financial assets. So, if the investments in equity instrument is held for trading, so the election to present gain and loss in the other comprehensive income is not allowed. It's not allowed siya if held for trading. Kay not held for trading mo ni ang kaning equity instrument at fair value through OCI. Ano siya? Next, debt investment shall be measured at amortized cost if both conditions are met. First is the business model is to hold the financial asset in order to collect contractual cash flows on specified date. And also, the contractual cash flows are solely payments of principal and interest on the principal amount outstanding or SPPI. So if both conditions are met, so that investment shall be measured at amortized cost. Next, that instrument shall be measured at fair value through OCI if both conditions are met. So same renegotiates amortized cost pero naay additional. So the business model is achieved both by collecting contractual cash flows and by selling the financial asset. And B, the conceptual cash flows are solely payments of principal and interest on the principal outstanding. So, ang additional ano niya kay by selling the financial asset na siya selling the financial asset. So, my partner will discuss part 2.